Welcome to our lecture notes for class 12. Today we're going to review a couple of the loops types that we've looked at over the past week and look at a new one. And we'll also write some code to try out our knowledge. First, we mentioned the idea of a flag controlled loop before. This is a repeated execution of a set of statements until some flag variable, usually a Boolean variable, is set in the body of a loop. For example, you see here a do-while loop, which is a flag-controlled loop. This is a common structure you see with input validation, and we discussed this in class and we wrote some code which uses it. Simply asking the user for a piece of information, inputting the information, and then checking it to make sure it's quote-unquote valid. If it's not, we tell the user they did something wrong, and ultimately the loop will make them do it again. If they did it correctly on the last try, we set a flag. In this case, we set the flag is valid input to true, and that will cause the loop to stop. Another type of loop we've seen is a counter-based loop, or counter-driven loop, however you want to say it. Now this is a basic idea known as counter-based conditional repetition. The repeated execution of statements for a set number of times. In other words, you know the number of times you need to repeat something in advance. Now in this case, we want this loop to go around 12 times. So you initialize some counter variable. Sometimes they're called count, sometimes they're called something else. But the while loop condition dictates when the loop will stop. The condition uses the counter variable and compares it against some ending value, some ending point, in this case 12. So while count is less than 12, we simply print the value of count to the screen on its own line. But a final and necessary step is to modify the counter variable. In this case, count++, which adds 1 to count. This ensures that the loop will eventually stop and does not become an infinite loop. In other words, one that never stops. Now another type of loop we're going to focus on today is sentinel-controlled loops. This is the repeated execution of a set of statements until some quote-unquote stop value is entered by the user. Some value which tells the loop to stop. Now in this case you see a while loop. There's a couple of different ways of doing a sentinel controlled loop. Here I'm going to show you a while loop, and in a moment I'll show you a do while loop. This is one way of doing it with a while loop. Simply prompt the user, priming them a little bit to tell them what to do and how to stop. We then input the value, and then we enter the while loop. While the input value is not equal to the sentinel value, we do it again. We ask them to enter the next value, we read it in, and we repeat this process over and over again until they enter that sentinel value. In this case, that's -1. So let's take a look at an example which uses a sentinel controlled loop. SquareRoots.java can be found on Canvas in the Code Samples module at the bottom of the Modules tab. Okay, let's take a look at a program called SquareRoots.java. This can be found on Canvas in the Code Samples module. Now, SquareRoots.java does a fairly simple task. It asks the user for an integer greater than 0, and then it simply echo prints the input value and prints out the square root of that input value. If we run this just to see how it works, and I'll compile it first, we get a prompt, and the prompt indicates to the user what they have to do and how they can quit this process. So I'm going to enter, let's say, 4. We all know the square root of 4 is 2. So the output says you entered 4. The square root is 2. Notice here there are 2 digits of precision. And if I enter another value, it'll tell me exactly what the square root of that is, and this process will continue until I make it quit. So in this case it says 999 to quit. 999 is our sentinel value. So if I type that in, hit enter, the program will end. Otherwise it would just continue this process for whatever integer I gave it. Now if we look at the code, on line 22 you'll notice here that we're declaring a constant. Now the constant I called sentinel, but recall that a constant is declared with the keyword final as the first word, and the name of the constant is always in all caps. That helps it to stand out amongst all the other code as a constant value. Now the bulk of the program is completed within a do-while loop. The do-while loop does the following. It prompts the user, it reads the value using the scanner, and then there's an if statement. The if statement checks to see if the user input value is not equal to the sentinel value. If that statement is true, it will echo print the input value, compute the square root, and then print the square root out with 2 digits of precision. This do-while loop will continue repeating this process until the user enters the sentinel value, in this case 999. Now you could use a while loop to do the same thing. It's pretty much up to you. Either would have the same effect. Now that we're done looking at squareroots.java, let's move on to doing something on our own. Today, in the Java Code Samples module on Canvas, what I want you to do is download stars.java. This is an incomplete program which you're going to complete. In the main method, we're going to implement the algorithm shown on the next slide. When you're done, submit your solution into the activity stars Dropbox. In other words, submit your copy of stars.java into this Dropbox, which can be found in the Lesson 7 module before 345. What you want to do is look for the comment which reads student: add code here. What you're going to do is replace that comment with code which implements the following steps. You're going to create a loop which iterates, or loops, while the value of count is greater than 0. And inside the loop, you're going to call the showStars method and pass it the value of count as the argument. Now you've called methods before and you've provided arguments before. If you think about it, when you call math.sqrt like we did in the last example, math.sqrt is the call to the method. The method is named math.sqrt. The argument is what appears in parentheses when you call it. Now in that case, we pass the input value. Here, you're going to pass it simply the value of count. So you call the showStars method by name, and in parentheses after the name, you put the word count. Once you've done this, you reprompt the user using the same prompt as you see in the code, similar to the one on line 28. Then you re-input the user input value, again similar to line 30. At this point, you're at the bottom of the loop, and the loop will ultimately repeat until the user enters 0. Go ahead and implement this algorithm. You can pause this video if you need to keep this slide available, but when you're done, submit your stars.java into the Dropbox on Canvas, the activity: stars Dropbox in the Lesson 7 module. For this week, don't forget, before Sunday at midnight, do the readings and preparatory exercises for Lesson 7, complete the activity harmonic series, which is a Zybooks activity, fairly small one, so just don't forget about it. There is no reflection associated with this activity. And due before class on Wednesday, March 4th is Homework Project 3. You have everything you need to be able to complete that project now, so please don't let it linger. It's perhaps the biggest project you will have had thus far, and certainly perhaps the most complicated.